Okay, in this video I'm going to basically just focus on drawing or shading objects, simple objects, because if you're able to draw simple objects like spheres, cylinders, boxes, cones, shapes like that, you could basically extrapolate what you learn from drawing those and be capable of drawing pretty much any geometric object, any type of object basically. Okay, so I'll also be drawing this object here, which is basically some sort of kaleidoscope type thing. As you can see, it's pretty cool. I just found it lying around, and so basically it's kind of cone shaped, and yeah, basically show you how to draw something that's a step up from basically a primitive object like a shape or just a basic cone. This has curves to it around the edges of the cone, and also this faceted lens type thing. Okay, so basically first off we should start with some simple objects that you know, can't go wrong with a simple object. It can't be too confusing, because shapes such as a sphere or rectangle, cube, etc., you know, it's the same way to draw those every time basically. Okay, so say you have like a sphere, and I'm just drawing a circle just so that you can kind of see where I'm going with it. A sphere, in order to see a sphere, there's light and dark tones involved, which your eye senses. Your eye can sense the changes in brightness, and it can also sense colors of the spectrum in the light. So in the absence of light, there's nothing. There's just blackness, there's shadow. And so if there's a light shining on a sphere, say it's going from this direction, how you shade the sphere kind of implies where that light is coming from. Obviously there's no light shining on this sphere because there is no sphere here. We have to kind of convey that there's an object here, and to do that we shade it certain ways to kind of suggest that there's something there, right? So usually there's kind of like a highlight area where it'll be the brightest, and area where it'll be the darkest. So somewhere around this side of the sphere that we're trying to convey, it'll be darker. So we'll shade this side, and this other side will be lighter. Okay, so we don't shade that side. Now there's more to it than that, but as you can see, we're already getting a sense of dimension to this, because in our mind we learn to identify certain patterns that we see and interpret them certain ways. So when we see that there's kind of a circular shape here with kind of a darker side to it, our mind kind of interprets that automatically, because we've been kind of taught to understand that that's what we see, right? So that we can kind of, you know, walk around in the world and not bump into things. Okay, so anyways, moving on. We have this darker side to it, but there's more to it than that. The object can cast a shadow if it's laying on a surface. right now it doesn't look as if it is, but it could be. And so, you know, based on the way the light shines, if it's shining this way, there'll be some space behind the object that doesn't catch any of the light, and so that will make that space darker to imply that that's the case. Okay, so when we do that, we automatically interpret what we're seeing, discern patterns and relationships between the darks and the lights, and you know, we can see or sense that the possibility that there's a sphere here laying on the surface, it's likely the case because that's how our eyes have kind of interpreted. Okay, so there's more to it than just this. We can add even more characteristics to the image to kind of suggest a deeper understanding of what it is we're seeing. If you understand how light works, light bounces off of surfaces and things like that. So even though the light isn't being blocked by this shape here, there's a possibility that the light will kind of bounce back off the surface that the sphere is sitting on and hit the sphere behind it, like underneath it, where it's kind of close to the surface. So the side closest to the surface isn't necessarily the darkest part of the object, because you know, the light is just kind of shining all over it and bouncing off of everything. So usually the core of the shadow is what this area is called, is usually the darkest. And then there's like the shadow, or medium shadow or tone, kind of in between the core and the highlight, or the light side of the object. And if the object is colored or isn't, you know, white and it's smooth, usually you can see like a specular on it where the light directly bounces off of it and into your eye. Say right, you can see the specular right here where the light is bouncing, and that's because the light is coming from this side, hitting it directly and then shooting straight into your eye. And so it's very direct, very strong, so you see the light there more brightly, and that's because this surface here is very smooth and it doesn't diffuse the light, it doesn't diffuse it. If the surface was more irregular, less smooth, if it was kind of fuzzy, the light wouldn't bounce off so directly. It would kind of bounce off in various directions, and so you wouldn't see such a harsh specular there. It would be more smoothed out, you know, such as my shirt. If it was shiny, there'd be a lot of speculars on it, on the wrinkles, but since there are not, it's just kind of diffused and kind of looks softer, basically. Okay, so we have this object here, and basically you have all those attributes that you've created. You've created it by just drawing it, implying that those attributes are there, and that's basically the trick of it, basically trying to imply that it's there because it's not obviously there. So if light's bouncing here, it'll hit the surface that the sphere is sitting on, bounce up, kind of make that side a little lighter. Okay, so it's basically just playing with it, kind of seeing how it'll work. Also, this shadow, it'll be probably darker towards the object where it's more hidden from the light, and as the shadow goes away, it'll kind of get more soft. And that kind of depends on how direct the light is. If the light's very close, very bright, then the shadow will be very dark and crisp. The edges will be really crisp. As the light moves away, there's more chance that the light will kind of bounce around the edge of the sphere and kind of soften the shadow a bit. So also, so yeah, we have the reflected light, the cast shadow, to highlight. Sometimes there's a specular here if this object isn't completely white, if it has some color or darkness to it, and then you'll have this kind of bright specular there. So let's move on to another shape, say a cube. Okay, so the cube, you could draw it any way, but I'll just put it more on an angle so you can see more of the surfaces. Okay, so you have the faces. You have 1, 2, 3 faces showing, and say the light's coming from the same direction just to keep things consistent. Kind of from the top, kind of from the left side, and this edge right here is closer to our sight, and so it's kind of cutting into the path of the light here, and so there's going to be a change from this side and that side, and the more drastic you make that change, the more it'll appear as if this edge is cutting into the path of the light here. So if we darken that, all of a sudden our eyes kind of interpret this area to suggest that this edge is coming forward, right? This side mostly. This side kind of also looks as if it's kind of receding away from us. And that's kind of what is happening. The angle of the surface is angled towards us here, and then it starts angling away from us. Okay, so you can kind of shade the rest of this as well, kind of darker. Okay, so also there's, if you remember reflective light, light could pass the object and then bounce off something and come back and hit the object in the shaded area. So this area doesn't necessarily have to be completely dark. You know, one side could be a little brighter to kind of suggest that there's kind of reflected light coming back and hitting it from this side, right? Okay, so yeah. Now these two surfaces are the same brightness currently, and so to help convey that there is a change in the direction of the surface, we should shade one surface slightly darker than the other surface. And which surface you shade determines how the light appears to be cast on it. So if I shade this side, it'll look as if the light's coming more from the top, because this top one will be brighter. Whereas if I shade the top one, it'll make the light appear to be coming more from the left side. Also, another thing to keep in mind, the more surface is facing you, actually that's not true, the more the surface kind of is angled towards the light, the more likely that it'll be lit up by the light. Whereas if the surface is angled away from the light, say like this, and it's angled kind of away from it, the light will kind of deflect off of it at a greater angle. Whereas here it'll deflect at like a smaller angle, showing that the light hitting it is kind of more concentrated onto it, whereas the light hitting this side is less concentrated. So we should probably darken the top side, if that's the case. That's what we want to convey to the person viewing this image. So the light's coming this way, it's kind of hitting this side more, this side less. This side even less. Although they're pretty reflective light. Same with the top side, there could be reflective light hitting that as well. So we do something like that. Also, there could be a cast shadow, coming off of it. And all these things kind of add to the illusion that there's an object there. Right? Okay. So, what's next? You can do cone shapes as well. Same thing. And this edge might not be completely bright if the light's coming kind of in front of it at the cone. Somewhere towards the edge be darker, and then like towards the back side it'll be receiving a bit of reflective light there, so it won't be as dark. it's sitting on something, there might be a little shadow underneath it, right there, kind of showing the darkest area. And then kind of cast light, cast shadow back there. Could be softer if you want. And there you go. The illusion of cone shape. You can do it with cylinders as well. Same things apply. One side could be darker, they could both be the same value if you want. It'll make it appear as if it's coming, the light's coming down the center of the object. I'm brightening up that side to show kind of more reflective light. Okay, so what's next? Let's go back to this one just to show a darker version of it. Okay, so let's draw this kaleidoscope. It's kind of fun. Anyways, so I'm going to set this down. And I'll probably pop up an image of it just so that you can see what I'm looking at. But I can't do that right now. Anyways, let's rotate this around just so that we have a clean area to work with. Okay, so basically what it looks like is a cone shape. So basically from these primitive objects that we've drawn, we can kind of use those to construct a more complicated object. The kaleidoscope has kind of a cone shaped length to it. But the cone isn't completely pointy, it's kind of cut off at the end, and then we have like this round kind of torus shaped bit to it, which kind of looks like a stretched sphere, or a sphere that's kind of stretched around the end of it. And then on the other side we have the same thing, kind of like contour shape. Okay, so basically what I did was just kind of get the outline of it. Before we start adding any values to it. Kind of doing this quick so that I can wrap up the video before my camera cuts out. Okay, so it's kind of like that. There's kind of a depth to this edge where the lens fits, and then the other side. And the lens has all these little hexagon shapes to it. Just draw those to give it a little illusion of the lens. Okay, so the light is coming from this direction, kind of hitting the front of it to the side. And there's a lot of reflective light going on. It's sitting on top of a white surface, so there's a lot of white light kind of reflecting up onto it. This side over here is kind of darker. These faceted shapes are kind of doing some weird thing with the light, kind of reflecting it various ways. Okay, so there's like a specular right here because the surface is very smooth, and there's also kind of a specular over here. And I don't want to outline those too darkly because they're speculars, they're not shadows. So you don't want to be making dark marks there. But objects it's not a white object, it's a red object. It has a value to it. So I'm just going to darken the object, except for those speculars. And also the lens kind of has lighter areas to it. Also has a cast shadow. Going something like that. Okay, so continuing on, you kind of get the sense of the depth of the surfaces. You can see the shadow kind of reflected up onto the object. The object's very shiny. The shadow's kind of reflected on it. Shadow also is very dark right next to the object where it's sitting on the surface. This side's kind of dark, even though it's on the left side towards the light. It's kind of angled away from the light. Whereas right here in the center of this curve, it's angled directly towards the light. It's kind of reflecting the light into our eyes. Actually, the surface is kind of facing the angle that's centered between our eye and the light, and that's why it's kind of reflecting it very directly. This edge is kind of dark and kind of reflecting the darkness in this lens right here. Same with up here as well, kind of reflecting that dark shadow into the lens. It's actually bright, reflective light that kind of goes along the edge of this torus shape. Because the light's kind of bouncing off the surface that it's sitting on, hitting the edge of it. Probably should have drew it a little larger. It's kind of hard to fit all the details into it at this scale. That's alright, I guess. Okay, so pretty much done at this point, I think. Depends how much you want to refine it.